Okay, I would like to express briefly an idea which I have understood is that the other, the not being of what is, in German that's das Anderssein, the other being or the being other, is the self. Although when we speak of the self, we are already in the realm of psychology, but in the realm of pure logic, Dasein, which is being there or determinate being, is one with its Anderssein, with its not being, because the Dasein is what it is through its limit, and what gives it its limit, therefore its being, is the not being of itself. So it is its own not being because it has its being in the not being of itself. And if you descend into the realm of nature and spirit, you understand that whatever is an other to the self is actually essential, and in Hegel, essential determinations are what he calls Reflexionsbestimmungen, which are determinations of reflection, which are in a duality and are in a ontological identity with one another, that whatever is considered as to be an other for the self is actually itself. And the self can only reveal itself to itself, become conscious of itself, by having an other opposed to it. And by becoming conscious of the other, of being the not self of the self, at the same time it comes into consciousness of itself. So when you know who your other is, you know who you are. And if you want an empirical explanation of that, my own intellectual journey, which became a spiritual journey, started around 2016 when I started to read about Islam in the Western world. And up until that moment, I had a very vague consciousness of my being in the world. I was in the vague. And for the first time, it struck me that Islam was another for me, that there was a difference between my being and Islam. And by defining Islam as my other, I immediately identified myself with those who are opposed to Islam in the West, namely the conservative right, who are critical of radical Islam. So by opposing Islam, I became a conservative. And later on, I opposed the Great Replacement, and I became someone in the process of being replaced, and I identified with a European, but that was vague. And then I became conscious of the opposition between non-white, and that's how I became conscious that I was white. I became conscious of the opposition of the Jews, and that's how I turned towards the radical right, because for me the other was the Jews. And I had an experiment, or a consciousness, an awareness that nature was rational, and that my mind was capable of rationality, so that the other in the realm of nature, the movement of the planets, the passing of the seasons, and all that, was rationally graspable by my mind, and by any rational mind, so that it was not completely alien. It was rational. It was the reason in nature and the reason in my mind were identical. And that's when I had a very intense mystical experiment. And later on, I would consider that there were the forces of disintegration and death, which were opposed to what I consider to be an otherworldly principle that I thought was Europe as a spiritual entity. And then I say maybe this otherworldly principle is Christ, what Christians call Christ. So I was in this opposition, and then I opposed myself. I was converted to Christianity in 2018, and then I opposed myself to the liars. There were liars, including within Christianity, the Catholics, not all of them, but most Catholics, the leftists, and they were the other. And then I had the opposition between God and the deep state, is the realm of politics, the CIA, high finance, and bankers and all that. That they were the other from me, until I realized in August 2018 that the other is the other of God, because God has no other, although the concept of God includes and involves the fact of becoming another to itself, so that God is necessarily his own other. And I understood that. And it means that every opposition is an opposition of the self to itself, and the self can only produce itself and become conscious of itself and become itself by opposing itself to itself. So that's why the other is necessarily the self, and that's why the other is a mirror of the self, because the mirror is where you see yourself. That's what I have understood.